The great hall was silent. It was a deep, heavy silence, the kind that comes just before a storm. Ji-hun stood with hundreds of other cadets. They were all hopefuls, dreaming of a place in the Galactic Alliance's Interstellar Officer Academy. This was the entrance exam. Ji-hun looked around. There were beings from many worlds. Tall, insect-like Vardonians with shiny black shells. Short, stout talk from the heavy gravity world of Gran. A group of feathered Rickcore who chittered softly. And many humans like him. He saw a tall, strong-looking cadet named Boram who stood with his chest puffed out, looking confident. Ji-hun did not feel confident. His hands were a little sweaty. He wiped them on his uniform. This academy was the best of the best. Everyone said the exam was incredibly hard. It was famous for its difficult tests. People talked about simulated space battles against impossible odds. They spoke of survival scenarios on deadly alien worlds. They whispered about complex puzzles that tested the mind to its limit. Ji-hun had studied all of it. He had practiced tactics and strategy. He had trained his body. He was ready for a fight. He was ready for a war. At the front of the hall, a tall Vardonian officer stepped onto a platform. His name was Captain Kale. His body was covered in hard, dark plates that looked like polished stone. His voice was deep and clicked slightly when he spoke. It echoed in the silent hall. "Cadets," he began, "you are here to prove your worth. The scenario you are about to enter will test your judgment, your resolve, and your understanding of the Alliance's core principles. Your objective will be clear once you begin. The simulation is peaceful." The last word hung in the air. Peaceful. Ji-hun heard it, but his brain did not quite believe it. Did he say peaceful? The cadets around him shifted. A few whispered to each other. Boram smirked as if he knew a secret. Ji-hun was confused. How could an exam for the most elite military academy be peaceful? It must be a trick. Maybe it was the calm before the attack. Maybe peaceful was the name of a warship. He braced himself for a trap. The world around them dissolved. The clean white hall vanished. One moment they were standing on a smooth floor. The next they were in the middle of a noisy, crowded spaceport market. The air was thick with strange smells. Music from a dozen worlds mixed with the shouts of vendors. Bright holographic signs flashed in languages Ji-hun did not know. It was chaotic and overwhelming. His training kicked in. His eyes scanned the area, looking for threats, for exits, for weapons, and he found the threat almost immediately. In the center of the market, two groups were facing off. On one side were the Thule, big reptilian people with thick scales and sharp teeth. On the other side were the Rickcore, bird-like creatures with sharp beaks and angry-looking feathers. They were arguing over a large crate that had been smashed open, spilling out glowing blue fruit all over the ground. The argument was getting louder. A Thule guard shoved a Rickcore merchant. The Rickcore squawked in anger and raised a sharp, metal-taloned hand. Others from both groups started closing in. Weapons were being drawn. Energy blades from the Thule, shock staves from the Rickcore. This was the spark. This was where the war would start. The exam had begun. Ji-hun's mind raced. Resolve the conflict. That was the objective. How? He could try to talk to them, but he didn't speak their language. He could try to get between them, but he would probably get hurt. He saw Boram and a few other humans moving to the side, looking for a tactical advantage, maybe to flank the groups or find a control panel. Then Ji-hun saw her, a human cadet he had not noticed before. Her name was Yuna. She was not tall or imposing. She looked calm. While everyone else was tense, ready for a fight, she just stood there observing. She had a quiet face and dark, thoughtful eyes. And then she started to walk. She didn't run. She didn't sneak. She just walked straight towards the two angry groups who were about to start a riot. Ji-hun wanted to shout at her to stop. It was suicide. She was going to get herself torn apart before the exam even properly started. The Thule guard at the edge of the group saw her approaching. He turned, hissing, his large body blocking her path. He raised a heavy arm to push her back. Ji-hun held his breath. This was it. Yuna stopped. She didn't raise her hands to fight. She didn't try to duck. She looked up at the big, angry reptile. And then she smiled. It was a small smile. A simple, gentle human smile. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a threat. It was just friendly. The Thule guard froze. His aggressive posture faltered. He was confused. This small, soft creature was not acting like a threat. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't fighting. She was just smiling. Then Yuna slowly pointed. She pointed not at the guard, not at the other group, but down at the ground, at the spilled, glowing blue fruit that was the cause of the whole argument. The Thule guard, still confused, followed her finger and looked down at the fruit. In that one moment, everything changed. The guard's focus was broken. His anger was interrupted by a simple, kind gesture. He was no longer thinking about fighting the Rikkor. He was thinking about the spilled fruit and the strange, smiling human. Ji-hun watched, his mouth slightly open. He couldn't believe it. She hadn't thrown a punch. She hadn't given a grand speech. She had used a smile and a pointed finger. It was the most basic thing he had ever seen. And it had worked. He looked at the other cadets. Bo-ram was staring, a look of disgust on his face. He clearly thought it was a stupid trick. But Ji-hun felt a dawning understanding. Captain Kale had said the exam was peaceful. They had all thought it was a lie or a code word. But what if he meant it literally? What if the goal was not to win a fight, but to stop one from happening at all? While everyone else was looking for a battle, Yuna was the only one who had listened. She was the only one who understood that the real test was peace. And she was passing. The tension in the market was still high, but the first spark had been put out. The two groups were still angry, but the fight had not started. Yuna had created a small bubble of calm in the chaos. Ji-hun realized that the most powerful weapon in the room wasn't a plasma rifle or a shock staff. It had been a simple, peaceful smile. He didn't know what would happen next. The simulation was far from over. But he knew one thing for sure. He needed to watch Yuna. She knew something that the rest of them did not. This response is AI-generated, for reference only. The strange calm in the market did not last. A loud alarm began to blare. Red lights flashed across the high ceiling of the spaceport. A computerized voice echoed in several languages. Security breach. Control center lockdown initiated. All non-essential personnel, evacuate. The Thule and Rikkor, distracted from their fight by this new development, looked at each other with a fresh wave of suspicion. The real problem was no longer the spilled fruit. It was the station itself. The exam had shifted. Captain Kale's voice cut through the alarm, calm and clear. The initial conflict was a symptom. The disease is in the control center. Secure it before the station's defense systems are activated against the civilian ships in the dock. A new objective. A clear goal. Ji-hun felt a surge of purpose. This was more like what he had trained for. The cadets began to move as one, a river of different species flowing towards the wide corridor that led to the control center. Ji-hun kept his eyes on Yuna. She moved with the group, but her calmness stood out. She was not running. She was walking with a steady, determined pace. The corridor was wide and brightly lit, but it was blocked. A heavy metal security door had slammed down, sealing the way. On either side of the door, two large automated turrets emerged from the walls. Their red targeting lasers swept across the crowd of cadets. Bo-ram was at the front. "Turrets! Take cover!" he yelled. Chaos erupted. Cadets scrambled behind cargo containers and support pillars. A TOC cadet, thinking his thick skin could take the hit, charged forward. A bright blue bolt of energy shot from a turret, hitting him square in the chest. A light on his uniform harness flashed red and he froze in place. A computerized voice said, "Cadet neutralized. Please remain for debrief." He was out. "The first casualty, see?" Bo-ram shouted from behind a large crate. "They're not playing around. We need to take them out." A few cadets leaned out and fired their training lasers at the turrets. The bolts sizzled against the turrets' armored shells, leaving no mark. The turrets returned fire instantly, forcing the cadets back into cover. It was a stalemate. Ji-hun watched the turrets. They were fast, but they seemed to track sudden movement. When everyone was hiding, their lasers just swept back and forth, waiting. He saw a pattern. They always paused for a half-second after switching from one target area to another. It was a tiny window. While the others were planning an attack, Yuna was just watching. Her eyes were not on the turrets themselves, but on the space between them. She was looking at the floor, the ceiling, the patterns of the targeting lasers. She was not looking for a weakness to destroy. She was looking for a path to pass. Then she did something unbelievable. She stood up from behind her cover and started walking towards the turrets. "Hey, are you crazy? Get down!" Ji-hun called out, his heart pounding. Yuna did not look back. She just kept walking. Her steps were even and smooth. She did not run. She did not duck. The turrets instantly detected her. Their red lasers locked onto her chest. Jihyun held his breath, waiting for the blue bolt that would end her exam. But the bolt did not come. The turrets tracked her, their barrels following her movement, but they did not fire. It was as if they were confused. She was not a threat. Her movement was too calm, too non-aggressive. Their programming was designed to identify and eliminate hostile, rapid movements. Her gentle walk did not register as an immediate danger. She was almost halfway to the door when one of the turrets let out a sharp beep. Its programming must have overridden the confusion. The barrel glowed blue, charging a shot. This was it. Jihyun closed his eyes for a second, not wanting to see her fail. When he opened them, he saw something impossible. Yuna had not run. She had simply stopped walking and turned slightly towards the turret that was about to fire. She raised her hand, not in a fist, but with her palm open, facing a large, heavy cargo container that was sitting off to the side of the corridor. There was no sound, no flash of light, but the multi-ton metal container slid across the floor as if it were made of paper. It moved smoothly and silently, gliding into the space between Yuna and the turret just as the blue bolt fired. The energy bolt slammed into the container, scorching the metal, but Yuna was safe behind it. Jihyun stared. His brain tried to catch up with what he had just seen. She had not touched the container. She had not pushed it. She had just moved it, with her mind. A whisper went through the crowd of cadets. Gravitic kinetic, Jihyun had heard of them. Humans with a rare genetic ability to manipulate gravity. He had never seen one before. He thought they were just stories. But here she was. Yuna was one of them. She used her power not to crush the turrets, but to protect herself. She continued her walk using the container as a moving shield. She guided it with small gestures of her hand, the huge metal box obeying her silent commands. She reached the sealed door and stood there, safe behind her gravity shield. The rest of the cadets saw their chance. "Now go now," Boram yelled. While the turrets were focused on trying to shoot Yuna's shield, the other cadets rushed from their cover and ran down the corridor. They gathered at the sealed door, safe from the turret's line of fire for a moment. Boram looked at Yuna, his expression a mix of awe and annoyance. "You could have just crushed those things," he said, pointing back at the turrets. Yuna looked at the sealed door. "That is not the goal," she said softly. Her voice was calm. "The goal is to get to the control center, not to break everything in our path." Jihyun understood. She was still following the peaceful path. She used her incredible power to create a solution, not more destruction. She had found a way through the problem without violence, but now they faced the next problem. The door. It was a solid slab of advanced metal, with no visible controls on this side. Boram slammed his fist against it. "It's no use. We need to find another way, or we need to blow it open." Yuna placed her hand on the cold metal of the door. She closed her eyes. "There is another way," she said. "A quieter way." Jihyun watched her, wondering what incredible thing she would do next. The exam was not what he expected. It was not a test of strength. It was a test of something else entirely, and he was starting to learn that the strongest person in the room was the one who did the least amount of breaking. The group of cadets stood in the narrow safe zone by the door. Behind them, the turrets continued their relentless sweep, their red lasers cutting through the air. They were trapped in a small pocket of safety, and their only way forward was a solid wall of metal. Boram was furious. He kicked the door. It did not even make a dent. "This is stupid. We need heavy weapons. We need to blast through." A Vardonian cadet clicked its mandibles. Explosives in a confined space would be illogical. "The risk to us is too high." "Then what do we do? Stand here until the exam ends?" Boram snapped. All this time, Yuna had her hand on the door. Her eyes were closed. She was not pushing against it. She was just feeling it. Jihyun watched her closely. He saw her fingers tracing almost invisible lines on the metal surface. She was not looking for a keypad or a lock. She was feeling for something else. "The door is not just a block," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "It is a system. It has parts that move. It has a structure." Boram scoffed. "Of course it has a structure. It's a door. What does that matter?" Yuna opened her eyes. She looked at Boram, then at the others. Her gaze was calm. "If you break the structure, it falls apart. But if you understand the structure, you can ask it to move." She placed both of her palms flat against the cold metal. She took a slow, deep breath and let it out. The air around them began to feel heavy. It was a strange feeling, like the pressure change before a storm. Ji-hun's ears popped softly. At first, nothing happened. Then a low groan started to come from deep within the door. It was a sound of metal under a stress it was never designed to handle. But it was not the stress of an impact. It was not a hammer hitting it. It was a different kind of force. Yuna's face was a mask of concentration. A single drop of sweat rolled down her temple. She was not straining her muscles. She was focusing her mind. Ji-hun saw the metal of the door begin to change. It was subtle. The surface of the door started to shimmer like the air over a hot road. The groaning noise grew louder. Small panels near the edges of the doorframe began to buckle inwards, not outwards. It was as if a giant, invisible hand was squeezing the entire door uniformly from all sides. Boram took a step back, his eyes wide. "What is she doing?" "She is convincing it," Ji-hun said, surprising himself. He understood now. She was using her gravity power not as a battering ram, but as a precise tool. She was applying immense, even pressure on every single part of the door and its locking mechanisms at the same time. There was a loud crack from inside the wall. It was the sound of something internal snapping. Then another. And another. It was the sound of bolts shearing off, of locks breaking under a force they could not resist. Yuna did not push the door open. She simply stepped back, lowering her hands. The heavy pressure in the air vanished. The door was still closed, but now it had a different feel. It was no longer a sealed barrier. It was just a piece of broken metal. She reached out one hand and gave the door a gentle push. With a grinding screech of tortured metal, the door slid open a foot. It was stuck in its tracks, its internal mechanisms completely destroyed, but the path was open. A dark corridor stretched out beyond it. A stunned silence fell over the cadets. They had just watched someone open a secured blast door without touching a single control and without using any weapons. She had simply asked it to move, and when it refused, she had politely persuaded it. Yuna turned to look at them. Her face was pale from the effort, but she managed a small, tired smile. "The path is open," she said, her voice soft. For a moment, no one moved. They just stared at her and the broken door. Then the urgency of the exam returned. The control center was still ahead. They had to move. Boram was the first to snap out of it. He pushed past her, squeezing through the narrow opening. "Finally! Let's go!" The other cadets quickly followed, rushing into the darkness. Ji-hun waited. He looked at Yuna. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, taking a deeper breath. "It takes a lot of focus, but I am fine." She looked at the broken door. "It is better than blowing it up." Ji-hun had to agree. There was no debris, no shrapnel, no risk of hurting anyone. It was the cleanest, most precise door breach he had ever seen. It was also the most terrifying. The power she had was immense, but her control over it was absolute. He followed her through the opening. The corridor on the other side was dark and quiet, lit only by emergency floor lights. The sounds of the turrets were gone, left behind them. The only noise was the hurried footsteps of the other cadets ahead. They were getting closer to the control center. Ji-hun knew the final challenge was ahead. He did not know what it would be. But for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. They had Yuna, and she saw solutions where everyone else only saw obstacles. They moved down the dark corridor, a group of hopeful cadets led by a girl who could move the world with a thought and a smile. The exam was not about fighting. It was about thinking, and she was the only one who had been thinking correctly from the start. The dark corridor ended at another door. This one was different. It was not a security door. It was a normal sliding door made of a strong, transparent material. Through it, they could see the control center. It was a large, circular room. Walls of glowing screens and complicated control panels lined the sides. In the middle of the room, two figures stood arguing. One was a Thule commander, his scales flushed with dark red anger. The other was a Reek Corps director, her feathers puffed up in fury. Their voices were muffled by the door, but their gestures were clear and dangerous. Both of them had a hand hovering over a large red button on their respective control panels. "The station's defensive weapons," a cadet whispered. "They are going to fire on each other's ships." The civilian ships were still docked outside, full of people who had nothing to do with this fight. If those weapons fired, it would be a massacre. This was the final conflict. This was what the whole exam had been leading towards. The cadets gathered at the transparent door. It was locked. "Okay, new plan," Boram said, his voice low and urgent. "We rush in. We stun them both before they can press the buttons." He and a few others raised their training weapons. They aimed at the two leaders through the transparent door. Captain Kale's voice suddenly filled the corridor, cold and firm. "A hostile action will result in mission failure. You have 10 seconds. A loud countdown began. 10, 9. Panic exploded among the cadets. "What? We can't shoot them?" Boram yelled, lowering his weapon in frustration. 8, 7. "Then what?" "Do we talk to them? We don't have time," shouted another. 6, 5. They were trapped. They could not use force. They could not get through the door quickly. They had only seconds left before the leaders would destroy each other and they would fail the exam. Ji-hoon's mind raced, but it was a blank. There was no solution. He looked at the others. Their faces were masks of fear and confusion. They had come so far, only to fail at the final moment. Then he looked at Yuna. While everyone else was panicking, she was perfectly calm. Her eyes were not on the countdown or on the other cadets. They were fixed on the scene inside the control room. She was studying it. 4, 3. This was it. Failure. Yuna moved. She did not look at the door. She did not try to open it. She simply raised both of her hands, her fingers spread wide. She was not looking at the leaders. She was looking at a small decorative fountain in the very center of the control room. It was a beautiful thing, with clear water bubbling up and falling back in a gentle cascade. A symbol of the station's past life. A place of peace and trade. The air in the corridor grew thick and heavy again. The pressure made Ji-hoon's head feel tight. 2. Inside the control room, the water in the fountain did something impossible. It stopped falling. The upward spray of water froze in midair, a glittering sculpture. Then, as if an invisible giant hand had scooped it up, the entire contents of the fountain, every drop of water, lifted into the air in one single shimmering sphere. The Thule commander and the RIC Corps director, their fingers just an inch from the red buttons, stopped. Their angry shouts died in their throats. Their eyes widened in shock and wonder. They stared at the giant, perfect sphere of water floating in the middle of the room. It glowed with the light from the screens, turning into a beautiful, swirling jewel. It was so unexpected, so completely outside of anything they were thinking about. Their minds, filled with hate and the desire for battle, were suddenly empty. They were filled instead with a simple, pure feeling of awe. Yuna, her face pale and strained, made a gentle pulling motion with her hands. The giant sphere of water stretched. It began to form a shape. It became a long, glittering bridge, a beautiful temporary arc of water that reached from one side of the room to the other, passing right between the two leaders. It was a bridge, a symbol of connection. In that single, silent, beautiful moment, the will to fight was completely washed away. The Thule commander slowly lowered his hand from the button. The RIC Corps director did the same. They both looked at the water bridge, and then they looked at each other. The anger was gone from their faces. It was replaced by a shared understanding of the madness they had almost committed. The water bridge held for a second longer, sparkling under the lights. Then, Yuna let her hands fall to her sides. The water lost its perfect shape. It fell to the floor with a great splashless sigh, spreading out in a wide, harmless puddle. The control room was silent. The two leaders stood there looking at the wet floor between them. The immediate threat was over. A soft, clear chime sounded through the entire station. Simulation complete. Objective achieved. Peaceful resolution. Successful. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the corridor. The cadets stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Then, the transparent door in front of them slid open with a quiet hiss. The path was no longer blocked. They had passed. They had won. Not by fighting, but by creating a moment of peace so beautiful it could not be ignored. Ji-hoon looked at Yuna. She was breathing heavily, leaning against the wall for support. Using her power in such a precise and gentle way had taken everything she had, but on her face there was a small, tired, and peaceful smile. She had done it. She had used gravity not to crush, but to lift water. She had used her power not as a weapon, but as a painter uses a brush to create something that changed everything. Bahram just stared into the control room, at the two leaders who were now talking in low, calm voices. He looked at the puddle of water on the floor. He looked back at Yuna. For the first time, there was no annoyance or competition in his eyes. There was only a deep, stunned respect. The exam was over, and the quiet girl with the incredible power had shown them all what it truly meant to be strong. The simulation faded away. The control room, the puddle of water, and the two alien leaders dissolved into shimmering light. In a blink, the cadets were back in the large white examination hall. The silence was heavy and full of thought. Ji-hoon blinked, his eyes adjusting to the bright light. He looked around at the other cadets. They all looked confused and tired. Their uniforms were clean again, but the memory of the station was fresh in their minds. He saw Bahram staring at the floor, his usual confident expression gone. He was thinking hard. At the front of the hall, Captain Kael stood on his platform. His dark, insect-like eyes scanned the room. He looked at each one of them, his gaze seeming to linger on every face. The silence stretched, making everyone nervous. Finally, he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it filled the entire hall. "You all came here today expecting a war," he began. "You prepared for one. You brought your strength." He looked at the top cadet. "You brought your speed." His gaze moved to the Rikcore cadets. "You brought your technology and your firepower." He looked at the humans, including Bahram. "These things are not special," Captain Kael said plainly. "The galaxy is full of strength, it is full of speed, it is full of weapons, every species has them. The Thule are stronger than you. The Vardonians have tougher skin. The Rikcore are faster. If this academy only wanted those things, we would not need you." He paused, letting his words sink in. Ji-hoon felt a chill. He had always thought that being strong and smart was enough. Now he understood it was not. You faced a problem that could not be solved by force. You saw it. A direct attack would have caused mission failure. Yet most of you only saw the problem through the lens of a fight. You looked for a way to win the fight within the rules. You did not look for a way to change the game. Captain Kael's eyes moved slowly across the crowd and stopped on Yuna. She stood quietly, her hands at her sides. She looked tired, but she met his gaze. "Except for one of you." The entire hall turned to look at Yuna. She did not seem uncomfortable. She just waited. "Cadet Yuna," Captain Kael said. "You possess a gravitic kinetic ability. This is a power that many species would fear. It is a fundamental force of destruction. It can crush ships. It can break planets. The instinct of the galaxy is to use such power as a hammer, to smash problems." He took a step forward on the platform. "But you did not use it as a hammer. You used it as a key. You used it as a shield. You used it as a painter uses a brush." He gestured to the empty space where the simulation had been. "You moved a cargo container to protect, not to attack. You did not break a door. You persuaded its locks to fail. And at the end, you used the power of gravity which pulls everything apart or crushes it together to create a thing of beauty. You lifted water and built a bridge." Captain Kael's voice became quieter but somehow more powerful. "You disarmed a situation headed for violence not with a bigger threat, but with a gesture of pure, unexpected peace. You did not pass this exam by being the most powerful being here. You passed by being the most peaceful. And you showed everyone here that true peace is not the absence of power. It is the absolute control over it. It is the wisdom to know when not to use it." He looked away from Yuna and back at all of them. "The Galactic Alliance does not need more soldiers who only know how to break things. We have enough of those. We need officers who know how to fix them, who know how to build, who understand that the highest form of strength is restraint. The most advanced strategy is to make sure the battle never happens." A wave of understanding passed through the cadets. Ji-hoon finally saw the whole picture. The academy was not testing them for the wars they would fight. It was testing them for the wars they would prevent. It was testing their character. "Your results will be sent to you," Captain Kale said, ending his speech. "Dismissed." The hall erupted into noise. Cadets began to talk all at once, their voices a mix of excitement and relief. They started to move towards the exits, their steps quick and eager to leave. Ji-hun did not move right away. He watched as other cadets walked past Yuna. Some gave her a respectful nod. A few even said, "Good job." Boram walked by her, hesitated for a second, and then gave a short, sharp nod of his head. It was his way of saying she had earned his respect. Soon the crowd thinned out. Yuna stood by herself for a moment, catching her breath. Then she turned and began to walk towards the exit, her steps slow but steady. Ji-hun hurried to catch up with her. He fell into step beside her. "That was amazing," he said. He could not think of a better word. Yuna looked at him and gave her small, gentle smile. It was the same smile she had used on the Thule Guard. "Thank you, Ji-hun. You understood the test from the beginning," he said. "The rest of us were just playing a different game." "The exam was peaceful," she said simply. "They told us the answer. We just had to believe them." They walked out of the hall together into a wide corridor. The future was uncertain. They did not know if they had passed yet. But Ji-hun felt a new kind of hope. He had seen what was possible. He had seen that humanity's place in the galaxy was not about being the toughest or the loudest. It was about something quieter, something smarter. It was about having the power to move worlds, but choosing instead to move a single, perfect drop of water to build a bridge. It was about having the strength to crush your enemies, but choosing to disarm them with a simple, peaceful smile. Yuna walked beside him, a quiet girl with the power to bend the universe to her will, and she had chosen to use that power to create a moment of peace. That, Ji-hun realized, was the most humanity fuck yeah thing he had ever seen.